Far right, Jay, you can wave. Oh, look at that. That's a welcome. Jay Mesinger, Messenger Jet Sales. You've been working very closely with NBAA on this. Janine from Avion, can we have a regal wave? Is that a wave? I'm not sure. We'll take that. Has been working with EBAA on this. And Jonny, who can't afford socks, from OGARAJETS, has been working with IATA on this. It's IATA, formerly known as NARA. It's like Prince. Okay, let's start. Jay, does business aviation have an ethics problem?
No.
Great, this is going to be short. Jonny? Does business, it's not so short if I have to repeat the question. Janine, does business aviation have an ethics problem?
Of course we do.
Okay, sorry. Jay, carry on.
What industry doesn't have some questions it has to ask of itself?
Jonny?
Yeah, I think any industry, especially one that has been as mature as aviation, has ethics issues, breaches, and it stems from all aspects, whether it's not just the three broker and dealers that are sitting up here, but I think that the industry as a whole could look a little bit deeper in itself and always find areas of improvement.
Jay, do you agree with that?
I do, and I think that I always say that our industry is a people business. People selling people airplanes, people providing services for people for their airplanes, and ethics don't drive the people drive the ethics. So I think that like every mature industry or less than mature industry, we have people that are willing to provide services in less than an ethical, transparent way.
Talking about maturity, a mature moderator would take the high ground and look at this as a serious. Can you give me examples of the worst cases? Can we have some examples, some tabloid, exciting examples where you've seen terrible ethical practices in the industry? Jonny, Jay, go for it. Jonny's just in a trance.
Well,
what's going on here?
I mean, we could take it from all different positions. And by the way, there could be some more chairs up here, and in those chairs, of course, could be people that have been in the maintenance business, people that have been in other segments of our industry, because we don't get the proud distinction as brokers to be the only people that have ethical issues. In fact, when NBAA did their statement of ethics, it was really based first on maintenance facilities that were tired of losing business to those facilities that were willing to pay somebody to bring the maintenance business to them. So, I think that it's an interesting time. By the way, it's a groundswell. I don't think there's ever been as much conversation about ethics as there is now, thanks to all the people in our industry that are starting to say enough is enough.
I think that's a fair point, and actually Brad Harris has put this up as well, that it applies to all segments, including customers.
They drive a lot of our problems, by the way.
But can we have an example of, a deal that you guys have seen, or observed, or a deal that's not closed because of ethical issues?
Well, if nobody's going to talk.
Yeah, no,
Go ahead.
I think more than anything, Al, none of us up here want to, serve as a police force and say that we're upholding a standard that others in the audience don't. At the same breath, I think that all of us here within the industry and in the audience will agree that we don't want to be policed. And it will just cause more delays and more frustrations and more inefficiencies within the market. I think it's incumbent upon all of us as professionals to kind of look within ourselves and the own processes that we hold within our companies and within the certain segments of our industry, and really question the processes that are done. Because when an ethic violation occurs, it is typically not held within just one aspect of the transaction. If someone is making a payback or a kickback, typically there are 3 or 4 different parties from all different varying angles of the transaction, whether it's finance, legal, maintenance, brokers, OEMs, that have optics on the transaction. And I think it's incumbent upon us to continue to talk about it and bring optics to the issues that are at hand.
So I think it's an interesting point there, Janine, where Jonny says he doesn't want the industry to be regulated. Actually, could it be regulated? When you've got to deal with a Kazakhstan buyer buying from an American using a Monaco-based broker, no one can regulate that deal, can they?
I think it's going to be difficult to regulate the industry. I think what's more important is when there are violations that occur, there are already laws in place to take care of those violations. Again, we're not trying to be a police force. We're not trying to hold ourselves out as higher than, or holier than thou, if you will. But it is a topical subject. It is something that can't be overlooked. If someone is found to be in violation of an existing law, then the answer is to punish that corporation or individual to the fullest extent of the law, and not necessarily hold that out as an example, but to help people to re-examine their moral compass.
We're all dancing around your question. You asked for some examples. And I think that we see examples. We were talking in the lobby earlier, and I think that interesting as our segment of the industry has matriculated from what was predominantly dealers to now predominantly brokers, the type of violations have changed. In the dealer community 20 years ago and before, much of the violation was around what would be considered commercial bribery, paying somebody a fee to make a decision about buying an airplane. Today, in the brokerage side, where the opportunity to buy has gone away, the opportunity for a greater financial gain could come through a back-to-back transaction, where the actual buyer is not dealing with the actual seller, and it is typically for a malicious intent to gain higher return for the person in the middle than might be stated or might be understood. I think the back-to-back is one of the most prevalent violations, and I think we're getting a lot of help to stop that. I think the title companies are helping us. I think the lenders are helping us. I think that the legal community is helping us sniff that out and leaving those people that are still willing to do it kind of isolated and on their own.
Although it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's quite, just to show how difficult the subject is, it's very hard to define a back-to-back. If you're a dealer and you buy an aircraft and you sell it before you've taken delivery of it, but you had the intention to pay it, is that a back-to-back?
Well, that wouldn't be the traditional back-to-back. I think that in that case, probably that's a pretty disclosed and transparent event.
The other element to that would be is whose money are you using to do that transaction?
Or even whose money are you using to put the deposit up where it starts?
Yeah, I think if that raises a good point, and there's a great quote that the best disinfectant is sunlight. But your buyers and sellers don't want their deals to be publicized, do they? They, manufacturers don't want everyone to know the terms they're doing. Can you ever give a client the information that they need to make a decision?
You can between the parties. Yes, there certainly can be a pathway of transparency between buyer and seller, whether there are intermediaries in between, as long as there is a clear ability to connect the dots between who the transaction is actually being completed between.
What percentage of deals have that level of transparency?
Every deal we do.
Every deal we do.
Yeah, same here.
Although even, and I believe all of you, but even then, there's no set way, is there? There's no set independent. Is there anyone you think, should escrow companies be giving more transparency? Should other brokers, you still don't know if the other broker you're involved in a transaction has also added in some level of complication necessarily, do you?
No, but we're able to connect the dots between the buyer and the seller. So if we can see that there is a third party interjecting themselves into the transaction, and it can be a legitimate back-to-back. We're in the process of a transaction right now with someone else in the audience, and they're legitimately buying the aircraft for their own inventory. And so the disclosure has been made to our client that we represent as the buyer, that there will be an intermediary party in between that they'll actually be taking title to. The point here, though, is that there's an element of transparency so that our client understands the path to their purchase. And they're then able to make an informed decision. If there was something that was unknown or undisclosed in that path, then again, it would still be our client's opportunity to make that decision, but they may not on the merits of who that third-party intermediary may be.
You know, Al, if I may add to that, I think there's a groundswell among the end users to have greater transparency. And in fact, a number of the deals that I've been involved with is of recent, the corporations that I represent have demanded it. They will not sell to an intermediary. It must go to an end user.
So I know one, okay, here's an interesting question. Can or can't the FAA issue a regulation requiring disclosure of a back-to-back to all parties? I don't know if there's a lawyer in the room who'd like to comment on that.
Well, they probably are disclosed because if they're filing an FAA bill of sale, the transaction is papered.
Okay, another question from the audience. Should it be legal / is it ethical for brokers to represent and be paid by both seller and buyer in a transaction?
I don't know that it's, you know, if it's disclosed, that's one thing. I don't know that it's practical, frankly, because as a less mature person, I potentially would have gone to a buyer and seller and said, hey, I'm representing your airplane, but I also have somebody that's asked me to buy an airplane, and yours is the perfect one. Could I split my fee in half? Well, that may look good on paper, but the truth is, at some point in every transaction, you've got to take a stand and really represent somebody. So if it's disclosed, it's probably, and both sides agreed, I'm not sure that it's an ethical question, but it's not a practical position.
Anyone else comment on that?
It's true. I think it becomes a bit of a conflict of interest because who do you support in the transaction?
And Al, we're back to all of the questions being directed back to the broker-dealers as if we're the catalyst of all the bad side of the industry and the ethic violations. And
Yeah, although to be fair, I think it may be just because we filled the panel with broker-dealers. One well-known broker has said to me, back-to-backs are a client's problem. If a client won't pay me a decent fee, I'll back-to-back them.
Well, I'm not going to say his name, but I would say to you that he ought to find different clients. Or maybe ask a reasonable fee.
Yeah.
I didn't mean it was a he.
I was going to say, how did you know?
There aren't that many hers.
It might be someone who prefers not to disclose their gender identity. Jonny, comments?
it's an interesting path to the justification. So the rationale there, and many of us know who you're referring to, and there are other people that take that same position, is that they are just a business broker finding the opportunity to pair together a buyer and a seller. And as long as each, the buyer and the seller, agree on the terms of the transaction, then what's the harm with them being interjected in the middle? It's a basic business transaction. I think the context that we continue to come through is through a scenario like that is that it lacks a level of unsophistication, a level of transparency, and a level of integrity that we believe that this industry should be held to a higher standard. And I was asked recently, you know, the age of our industry, and we were having this discussion outside of aviation, and I started to say that we were not a mature industry, but in fact, we really are mature. We're just not very sophisticated, and it's crazy that we can have a 50-year-old industry that is unsophisticated to the level that it does, and that does come back to the point of the broker-dealer side.
I think we have one of the most unsophisticated, sophisticated industries that there is. People send people a lot of money with bad contracts. They write deals on the back of napkins. They shake hands, all the kind of things that maybe you did in the Wild West. But these are very complicated complex transactions that involve a lot of money.
Nobody shakes hands anymore. With the layer of lawyers, sorry lawyers, but nobody shakes
Well, it's a group shake.
Yeah, I'm actually going to just leave lawyers out of this because they sue more than anyone else. How does IARDA's plan to cut attorneys out of the transaction process reconcile with the transfer? Has IARDA got a plan to cut lawyers out of the transaction process?
By process of elimination, that's my question, I assume. And Brian Proctor is probably in here somewhere who's better versed to answer it, but I'll answer it for you, Brian. To the very best of my knowledge, there is no plan to cut lawyers out. IATA is looking at a number of different initiatives, including some standardization of a basic document so that the industry has a foothold on a standardized engagement letter, both on the buy and the sell side, as well as the letter of intent. Certainly not meant to be a firm document in any case, but it'll be a document that will serve as a basis for all of the industry to start working from so that we don't have the backs of napkins and handshakes done.
And I think you should add that the lawyers in the yacht market who endorse the use of standard LOIs.
Correct.
And say that they haven't lost money because of it. And I think the yacht market's something we should look at. So surely, this is a question someone else has put, surely we should look at accreditation in the industry, more and more accreditation, not just for brokers, but for other people involved. Lawyers have bar councils you can complain to. For a broker does something, who do I can complain to? Who can I complain to?
Part of the unsophistication of a sophisticated industry.
There is no pathway right now.
Should there be one?
You're talking about a bigger agency. You're talking about a bigger agency that's going to have to establish some means of accreditation, credentials. I hate the word policing, but policing. But it seems like we're picking on brokers and dealers here.
Well, I think it started though, Jay, as Janine, as we talked about, with NBAA's statement of ethical and professional practices, and Gamma backed it up. IATA is working on a refined vision of theirs as well. There obviously is enough concern within the industry that is starting and evoking these discussions, and some of them are getting to be pretty heated when certain individuals are having to defend their practices over and over. So it's a clear sign that there are concerns within the industry by all of us that attend these meetings and that really do maintain these higher level of professional standards. I don't know that there's an answer, Al, as to whether or not the industry could handle the policing per se, but at this point we're making great strides in having the conversations and bringing the transparency to the table around what the ideals should be. It's forthcoming.
And I know you feel like you're being picked on as brokers and dealers, but I think everyone in this room has a story of a broker that has conducted a nefarious transaction. So I think there is a problem out there. And I think actually, let's put this to a vote in the audience. I think there is an issue with members of your profession who are giving it a bad reputation. So, and they may feel like we're picking on brokers, dealers, and we'll repeat this panel with lawyers and maintenance companies. But Jay, going back to the original question, do you think that the broker-dealer market does suffer from bad actors?
Well, I think our industry does. So I'll spread the wealth. But it's not unfortunate that we're having this conversation. I think it's fortunate that we're having it, and I thank you for making it a part of the agenda. And I don't mind standing here and supporting it from the dealer-broker standpoint, as opposed to trying to support it from the maintenance standpoint or the charter standpoint or any of the others. We could talk about gray charters. There's a lot of sections in our industry that cybersecurity. How many of us have gotten emails that we mistakenly clicked on and found that our wire transfer instructions have been changed? And I mean, there's a lot out there to talk about. I'm proud to talk about what goes on for us.
Always, always.
Never. It just depends if they wear socks and bow ties.
I think that's a really interesting point. I think we're going through when we talk about other parts of the industry, is this just because we've been through a really bad downturn? Do you think it's got worse since 2008, when you had a very cash-rich market, and then suddenly, when the market gets hit, does that encourage people across the board to and desperation is a great question of ethics. If your children are hungry, you'll steal a sandwich, which you wouldn't have done necessarily. I'm not saying anyone's children were hungry, but Janine?
I'm going to jump in and say that, personally, I think it's a very small percentage of the business that really you run into an ethical dilemma, if you will. I can't say that I've ever prospect or with new business development had to address the issue of ethics. It's more along the lines of what is the value of the service of having a broker assist me with the buying or selling of an aircraft. I have certainly, here I'm going to admit to it, observed, perhaps been to some degree a victim of questionable behavior, because the other thing is we seem to be focusing on transactions gone awry because of money. What about the conduct of people, just in a mean-spirited, unprofessional means by which to destroy someone else's business simply because they can't have a piece of it?
Well, that's a great point. But you could say that you could pick on the broker side, and is it more vicious since 2008?
I'm saying across the whole.
Well, what I was going to say is when you start a maintenance facility, that's a big investment to start that. That's bricks and mortar and people. Brokers, unfortunately, have no barrier to entry. The three of us do, having done it for as many years as we're doing it. That's our barrier to entry. That's our competitive advantage. But it's easy to come into this market. I used to say with a stack of quarters and a business card and say that you've done it. You've either been a pilot that sold an airplane once and all of a sudden you're a broker, or you have laid claim to that without a barrier to entry. And then when things get tough, we look like a sexy, wealthy segment of the industry. And I'm not sure that we're very sexy, and I don't think we're that wealthy, frankly. But it looks good from the outside, and it attracts a lot of nefarious. But Janine's right. It's really a small set of occurrences.
Yeah, and I guess that the question is, taking across the board, we all know of, people who have a terrible reputation, but people outside the industry don't. And so in some ways it's a small industry for the people in this room, but it's also a massive industry out there. And I think we all understate the size of business aviation. You just have to go to A-Base and see how many people you know there, or EBAA, E-Base, or MBAA, just the sheer number of people in this industry. Do you, is there anything you could do to educate? I don't know how you educate someone who's buying a business jet for the first time.
Well, someone who's a new entrant to the aviation industry has no clue what they're getting themselves into and no resources really that they can turn to. I think one of the steps, though, for the existing members within the aviation community is education. NBAA published a guidebook for their members, but I'm not sure how many members are aware that it's available online. EBAA is headed in the same direction. It's taking the posture of more, let's help raise awareness and provide some education as opposed to how to orchestrate a transaction. And always the recommendation is going to be to hire a professional and to vet that professional as well as you would any employee for your company.
Well, absent the policing, which is absent right now, and I don't know how we change that, but absent the policing, I think that what is at least happening with the different conversations that are starting is an awareness that really hasn't been around in our industry. And what I hope would happen would be that people would start to hear about this in their companies and start to ask questions and put down mandates. And be sure, for instance, that the flight department, in many cases, operates under the same cultural and ethical criteria as the rest of the company does. And sometimes in small companies, there's a divide between that. So maybe these conversations that are starting can start to happen at the top and filter and trickle down and have conversations in the flight department that say, you don't take kickbacks, and we don't do back-to-back deals, and we don't get involved. And that will at least be the start of a policing process, just the discussion.
Okay, so you've got, do we have any questions or comments in the room? I think we can probably move off from bow ties for a while. I think it's just jealousy from people who can't tie one. Yeah.
I'll just yell it.
Have we got a microphone? For,
What about a note? What about appraisers, bankers, OEMs, brokers taking a note? It's worked quite well in banking community over in Europe and Australia.
so the question from Rich Bergemeyer was, should there be an oath, like the Hippocratic Oath doctors sign? Should there be an oath that people make to their customers? Rich, is that a fair point?
Absolutely, that's exactly the point. The Hippocratic Oath for doctors, lawyers take it. So why not this industry, and certainly NAFA or AFA, maybe put that together as well as an ethics document or an 8-hour course that presents dilemmas. What do you think of that?
Well, if you sign an acquisition or brokerage agreement with me, it says in there, and I sign it, what I won't do around that. The problem is different than the Hippocratic Oath and different than the Bar Association. We don't have that association to go to when somebody fudges on their oath. I think you've got to check references. You've got to do a little due diligence on who you hire. And you know, I think that there's some self-awareness that has to take place among the clientele in here, and don't go into these expensive transactions in an unsophisticated way. If you were buying a piece of property, if you were buying a business, if you were doing the same kind of dollar transactions, you'd probably do more due diligence potentially with who you did business with. That's all we've got right now.
So Jay, you're putting it back on the potential buyers, and I'm suggesting that we put it on ourselves and our organizations, whether it's NAFA or the IAFA or whatever, put it back on them to maybe structure it with their member base that perhaps, number one, education, bringing it up, and then perhaps an oath. It's worked very well in the banking industry.
But I take that challenge. So do business with me or one of us, or actually 98% of the people that are out there to do business with, and they will stand behind their promise and their pledge and their oath. But it still doesn't take away from somebody doing some due diligence on who they hire. And I don't mean to shift the responsibility. What I mean is that everybody has the responsibility. First place, the good news is it's not pervasive in our industry. It really isn't. But a few bad apples can spoil the bunch, obviously.
Apples don't come in a bunch.
Basket. Give me a break.
Any more comments? I worked on a fruit farm. Yeah, we've got David Hernandez at the back. Or not at the back, mid-table.
Just interesting question. I saw it up there in the audience questions about fiduciary responsibility. And one way to solve this, and I kind of put this in when I'm asked, looking at brokers' agreements, what about putting in some type of malpractice indemnification clause in your broker agreements with clients, your marketing agreements?
Well,
Do you
I
have that, or just curious?
My agreement says I won't pay or take referral fees, finder's fees, commissions. It is there in mine, and I bet you that Jonny and Janine have similar kinds of
So
disclosures.
I'll give you an example. So if we screw up as lawyers, we get sued for malpractice. So what happens if a broker screws up?
I would be certain that they'd get sued.
I think the issue with suing a small brokerage is that if they don't have the insurance, it's pointless. They can just liquidate, which we have seen happening, and go, Jay,
Close up
you're
shop.
not going to rebrand as Mesinger
Well,
and Sons.
I don't want to, it's like telling people that I've got insurance that if I get kidnapped in a country, that just sets me up for getting kidnapped in a country. But We have errors and omissions insurance. And that's another investment that we make, by the way.
Yeah, which a smaller broker doesn't. Like, and I'm not knocking smaller brokers, because I actually think, and it's unfair to, I think they also get unfairly attacked regularly in this when we're all aware of, size doesn't.
By the way, that insurance doesn't cover you for fraud.
Yeah, the three of us are, and I think Jay is exactly right. When you look at the broader population of the broker-dealers, 98% are doing it right. And it doesn't take many, because the news that travels is only the negative news. We don't ever have the opportunity to hear about the positive interactions between broker companies and their clients and the good transactions that occur. There was one of the questions here. It is, have bait and switch tactics from X harm the industry in an ethical standpoint? And I had asked Jay earlier a question as to whether or not a small broker promising to deliver the same services as his firm could offer, but at a significantly discounted fee, is that a breach of ethical duties? And Jay said no, he didn't think so. He felt that that was really a bait and switch tactic. And we have a lot of talk within the industry that ties a lot of the behaviors of brokers back to a lack of fee discipline. Fees have been compressed over time, whether it's due through competition or due to poor salesmanship or an inability for them to articulate their competitive advantages and keep their fees up, whatever it may be. But in reality, I don't think it's the fee that is driving the bad behavior. It's the catalyst.
It's the person.
Well, now that you're talking about fees, and you said small companies taking a smaller fee, I won't give the example, but I've recently experienced with a large company offering a significantly discounted fee for the same services. That I don't quite understand. And when I've had a client question whatever my professional fee is, I base it on the fact of the level of experience and education that I bring to the transaction and my credentials. And I will come to that client and present them just as I would as if it was the very first transaction I ever did.
And, there's a boutique service, and there's an argument that you have one broker with a limited number of clients focusing on them rather than...
Exactly.
Say,
It's all relative to...
Okay, any more questions?
By the way, that could happen in anything, in any business, not just the aircraft brokerage business. Somebody trying to break into that business and trying to get in by having ridiculously low fees.
He's not listening.
Okay, I think any more last-minute comments from the room? Okay, I'm feeling this is all a bit depressive and a bit...
It's time for a cocktail.
It is very much time for a cocktail. But before we get to that, Jay, I know you're going to be amazing at this. Give us a positive... I think, personally, as an outsider to, who doesn't get involved in transactions and sadly has never been offered a massive bribe, I think that you would be crazy to buy an aircraft without a broker. I think you'd be absolutely mad to go in, and I think the level of complexity when you buy an aircraft and the mistakes you can make without an advisor, and the fact that you're in the market very rarely, even the most experienced owner would probably only ever buy 5 aircraft in their lifetime, and there's people who are out there in the market all the time. So I think there's huge arguments to use brokers. And but Jay, give us a positive note to end on.
Well, we were talking outside before the event. There is no way, personally, with a family business, that I would bring my wife, my children, or my dogs into a business that we did not conduct ourselves in the most ethical, transparent fashion. But to your point about would you do this without a broker, I think you gets what you gets. 2 ways. You gets what you gets when you try to think you can pay a low price to somebody, and you gets what you gets when you think you can do it without us. Because frankly, there are 100 ways in every transaction where who we know, the relationships we have externally with the maintenance facilities, with the people that are doing the pre-buy, that we know them and they know us, how we can navigate this industry and serve our clients in a way that a transaction can end. Everybody can put their file for that transaction, the customer, the broker, the buyer, the seller, in the drawer when it's over with, and then enjoy what it is they wanted, an airplane.
Janine?
No, I don't understand how anyone can approach buying or selling an aircraft without professional assistance, and how I have always stressed that it's not just the broker, though it may start there. It's assembling a team of qualified professionals, I'll use the word trustworthy, with a level of experience that can deliver unparalleled service to that particular client.
One of our guests that was up here earlier talked about the importance of a relational transaction and how important it was. At our firm, as I'm sure most of the others, we follow a very disciplined checklist that goes through the entire process. We're nearly 40 years in the business now. Chris Eisen, who manages all of our closings, on every transaction follows a 150-point checklist just to get through the closing process. And we try to emphasize that to all of our clients while we're working with their counsel, that there is just no way that they can cover the bases that we are adept at covering on a day-to-day basis, being in and out of the business. But what we really drive to is making that relationship a connective part of the transaction and letting them know that they're entrusted with us as a partner in the transaction and not just a facilitator.
Great. And I think on that slightly more upbeat, cheery note, I'd like to thank the panel.